Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Anne-Marie Horan. I'm a co-founder of the UpStart Collaborative, and on the Granby Park project my role is to look after volunteer recruitment. And I suppose the way that we're going to approach this talk today is that I thought I'd bring you a little bit about my personal perspective, how I got to be here in Granby Park and to be part of it. And then I'm going to pass the mic over to Sam, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about the actual Granby Park project and how that became a reality. So hopefully you'll get kind of the personal perspective, and then you'll get the kind of the bigger picture stuff from Sam. I suppose that when UpStart came together in 2010, and we came together to highlight the role of arts and creativity in society just around the time of the general election, I remember in specific one occasion when we were sitting around a table and we were thinking about maybe applying for charity status for the UpStart group. And I remember there being a lot of head scratching when we were looking at the charity status forms, as we were trying to fill out the fields of, you know, what it is that we do, and also what were our individual occupations. And I thought that's kind of a useful point to start on for this talk today, because I suppose, like many people in the UpStart group, I find it quite a complex thing to explain what it is exactly that I do. I'm a writer of poetry and short stories, and I do community work. I'm an arts administrator, and I don't know how all of that has equipped me to be part of the building of a park in the city centre, but somehow it has all amounted to this experience here. And so I suppose, in terms of explaining who UpStart are, we're a lot of things, we're many things. We're teachers, we're social activists, we're artists, we're writers, we're community workers, and we're probably not the people that you'd expect to see building a park. I suppose all of those things that I've listed about myself are actually probably not as disconnected as they seem. And I think at the core of the UpStart ethos is thinking about how we can creatively engage with individuals and communities to create transformation and change. And that's definitely where I'm coming from in terms of my own personal perspective. There's a lovely T.S. Eliot quote, which is, home is where one begins from. And maybe it's kind of apt as well to kind of touch on that and say that I'm really interested in this debate, and I suppose the statements that are going around that are UpStart, middle class hipsters, and what do they know about building a park, and are they just here and kind of gone tomorrow? And from my own personal background is that I grew up on the side of a hill in Donegal, speaking Irish in the 80s, so it's almost like not very hipster at all, but I think that home and landscape and where you start out from really shapes your creativity, and especially in the Gaeltacht, growing up speaking two languages and kind of sandwiched between the Atlantic and Northern Ireland, I suppose I personally come to this project with an appreciation of the duality of things and the otherness and the in-between spaces. And when UpStart was thinking about this particular Granby Park project, one of the things that came up quite a lot was the cracks and the fissures and the in-between spaces, and what comes out of that, which I think for me, in my life, that's where creativity comes from. I suppose that brings us then to this particular space. I guess for me, the writing of a poem is not entirely dissimilar to the building of a park. And so when I approach a poem or the creation of any piece of art, I'm looking at kind of the meaning of things, the duality of things, and I suppose it's a bit of a blind faith in the mystery of things and allowing things to take their own shape. And so that almost has kind of set the tone for my approach to this park here, taking a vacant space and placing my trust in people and trying to uncover, what it means to be part of a project like this, and then allowing it to kind of evolve over time. So I suppose that's kind of where I'm coming from and a little bit about what I do. And in terms of the actual Granby project here, as I said, I have been working with volunteers, and I think we're almost up on about 6 or 7 volunteers who have been part of the consultation and the building of the park, and who've actually created the installations and the things that you see here today. So that's been quite a magical thing, and also it's been a lovely kind of role for me to speak to people about where their passions and their talents lie, and to try and find out where they want to kind of contribute to the actual project as well. So I'm going to kind of pass you over to Sam, and he might give you a bit more information about the actual bigger picture of Granby Park.
So, yeah, I'm going to I guess when we were asked to speak on the theme of urbanism, I was kind of taken aback a bit, because I definitely don't think that I have any expertise in that topic at all, and I was saying earlier that when I think of the word urbanism, even though I studied architecture in architecture school, that all I can think of is concrete, and so it's not a really positive or very creative way of thinking when you hear a word like urbanism. And so I guess what I'll talk about here is actually more our process, but also what it's kind of some of the things that I've learned over the past week in terms of people using the park, and how it has made me think again about how we use our public spaces, and the design of our public spaces in Ireland. So hopefully it might help us to kind of realise like what these spaces are doing for us here as a park space. I guess one of the my favourite feedback quotes this week from a visitor, or a few visitors actually, to the park, is that they said that we appear to have catered for every demographic. And I'm not going to claim that we have, but it was a lovely realization that people had been thinking about that, and realized that actually there was so many different people who were in the park at that moment in time, and it's really exciting, and it kind of gives you shivers on your back when you look around sometimes in the park over the past week and have noticed the different age groups, the different backgrounds, different cultures, different religions, all coming together in one space, where 3.5 weeks ago there was some rubble and some needles and a kind of a broken down building over there and some rats. So that was 3.5 weeks ago, and I guess in itself that's pretty special to think about, because what we have now is a space which is still constantly evolving, but over the past 3 weeks has gone through a massive shift, and we have worked with 1,100 people. If you look at the thank you wall, that's the amount of people that have come together to make this happen. So and as Anne-Marie touched upon, it isn't the fact that we were experts in this at all. Like, actually, none of us have any research background in how we design public spaces, really, and how we might design a park or manage a park. And so those are the learning curves that we've had to go through over the past, well, I guess 2 years since it started. In some ways, chatting earlier, myself and Anne-Marie Anne-Marie commented on the nature of pop-up and that word pop-up, and I guess we were I'm kind of hesitant to use that word, and yet it is something that has been kind of attached to this project, and it's easy and it can be thrown around, but we were kind of saying how it really hasn't been a pop-up experience for us. We were going to liken it almost to a bit like a flower which puts all its energy into actually preparing itself for that final explosion of colour right at the end, but actually most of the energy is put into under the scenes and behind the scenes and under the surface. And so for the last 2 years there's been a mammoth task to make this happen, and that kind of that's why we kind of would be hesitant to apply pop-up to it. However, for most people in Dublin, what they would see would be something in the newspaper, and then they'd suddenly see this park, and then it'll go again. And so there's been a bit of, I guess there's always a bit of debate about whether is that really valuable. What is the value of doing something which is so temporary? Why would we go and do this much work when we're going to take it all away again? And that brings us right back to the very start of the project, when we had finished our poster campaign project, which some of you might remember, and Anne-Marie talked about, which was the 1,000 election posters around the general election, looking for a new project to work on, and looking at how for our election campaign posters it was all about bringing art into public space and getting people to think differently a bit, and redefining an object in the city, and exploring that. And I guess what we wanted to do then was to kind of look at another space, a vacant space, as a way of redefining that, and creating a platform for the creative people in Ireland to express themselves as well. So this isn't a finished palette. This is a platform for others to come and express themselves or put in their piece of work. So it's still evolving. There's still space for you to put in a piece, or run a workshop, or move something around and say, well, actually, I'd like to see this happen here. And that was very important to us, but it was that we wanted to create that platform. A bit like when we did the poster campaign, it was about, we didn't have a political message really. It was that we were providing the platform for others to express themselves. Again, in some ways, we aren't here shouting about vacant spaces so much, or about the lack of housing that might have happened here so far, or we're not going at it from a political aspect, while it is in a political sphere or context. It's more that we are providing the space for others, such as the community, to talk about their experiences and what their desires are for the space. And so I think that's quite it's something that we've been keen to keep throughout the project. But 2 years ago, we began exploring creating a park in the city centre. We had a warehouse down on Strand Street. We still have it. It's actually the old Louis Copeland workshop, where they made all the suits. And there was a site just down the road on Strand Street, which was our I guess something we would go past every day. And you might know it's just right beside the Abbey Street. It's the Jervis Street Lewis stop. There's a large 2-acre site there. Apparently 2 million people go past it every year. It is it's a perfect example of kind of, or a temple to the recession in some ways, in that it was about to be developed into the central bus station and hotel complex, and they were about to turn the sod on that, and the developer, I guess the crash happened, and it was within kind of a couple of weeks, just before they were about to go on site, that they pulled out. And so it left the owner, CIE, and developer and the contractor all scrambling to understand what to do. But when we went in to ask if we could use it, we quickly began realizing that sites around the city, they might be it might not just be one reason that they're vacant, just because the developer doesn't want to, was waiting for the value to rise or for getting other funds or whatever. There's actually multiple reasons why these sites aren't being used. And so whether it be kind of legal issues or disagreements, it's not so simple as just going and asking for a vacant site and getting it. And so all the while over the last 2 years, we've worked on building relationships and working out the best way of developing this project, because it's a hugely complex thing. Actually, it might seem quite simple to have a park or a green space, a few flowers behind a fence, but to really get it to a space where it's open, and especially when everyone is working voluntarily, you can imagine the amounts of challenges that we face, and also just the obstacles that we are coming up against, and also that process of working together as a team, which for me is really, really rewarding. So after exploring a few different options throughout the city of sites, we were also very keen to, while we were working on trying to get these sites, we were looking at how we could best work with the local community to develop something which was more real, but also something which we would learn a lot from, and that they would learn from as well. So our I guess the background to the idea behind the park was that if we wanted to create 10 of these around the country, first of all, let's say we wanted to create, let's say, creative green spaces in Ireland. First of all, we wouldn't have the capacity to do that, even though we might have the vision, and we wanted to see that would happen around the country. But also that, so we wouldn't have the capacity. We were all volunteers. We also realised that actually communities wouldn't actually adopt them as spaces, and we wouldn't have the capacity to actually work with each community and get and identify what their needs were, and how we would actually make it happen. So another idea was to actually use these vacant sites as a way to channel ideas and energy and resources and people and materials through one vacant site. Show what's possible. Show the magic of working together. Bring multiple different elements into the site, and then through that bring in communities who might be inspired, show them what's possible, give them a toolkit at the end, which is our experience and our learning from this park, give them a pack of let's say materials and furniture and plants, which is the legacy of, like, we have to take this down again, so we'd hope to give it off to other community groups to actually start it themselves. I guess the most powerful way of creating something in your own community is to do it yourself, and we felt that the best way for us to see something like this take off in Ireland was to do something which was really powerful, really inspiring, doable, achievable, and then facilitate others to come and learn as much as possible from our experience. And that's not just the good experiences, it's the bad experiences too. In some ways, we're keen to explore that idea that we're not very good in Ireland of embracing failure, or of exploring things, trying and failing. And while we're not necessarily going looking for failures here and trying to test things too much, this is almost an experiment. And the community who we went to meet from the get-go, as soon as we kind of came across the site and DCC hinted that it might be available, we went in and met with the regeneration group, and then we met with the kind of community leaders and explored if this was really going to be a goer. And while we approached it from an angle of, well, we have an idea of what we'd like to create here, we felt that was necessary because of the timeline that we were facing. And so while best practice might say, oh, well, you should probably do a 2-year regeneration process for this site, and you should work constantly with that community over the time, we kind of realized that would almost that was not possible, but it was also there was an opportunity here to do something quite quickly and to get whoever was interested involved, but also get any feedback so we could change things early on, and that seemed to work. And over time, people, the community, while they were initially quite concerned about noise issues and antisocial behaviour, it quickly turned into enthusiasm for creating a really a real change to the space. We, especially for the residents who live across the way, who look out on this space every day and they see, I guess they see what was housing here has now turned into rubble, and a kind of, they still await a regeneration program, which is, I believe, is still happening. And so the I guess I'd love to touch upon like that community issue a bit more, because actually when it came down to it, we realised that community isn't just the immediate houses that you see across the road, or the residents who live here in these newer apartments. There's actually a much wider and much more complex group that are living in this even electoral district, that actually 50% of the population who live in this district weren't born in Ireland. And when you start to really explore, as our six people who were on the community liaison team started to do back in March, April, realize that actually this isn't just about to a few different residents. Actually, there's a lot of people who don't engage in, let's say, the community centres that you would traditionally see. And what I've realised in creating this project is that the traditional community gathering spaces in Ireland have almost become a bit obsolete, and that that you might find that we have a kind of community centre around the back of this block of flats here. What you'll find is there's people who live in the blocks who are in that community centre, but actually there's a lot of people who pass by each day who are from different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds, who would never go into that community centre and wouldn't actually ever go to a community centre, it seems. And so trying to connect in with all the different communities, whether it be the Brazilian community, the Polish community, various religions, trying to find out where they congregate and commune, has been really interesting but really challenging, and I'm not so sure if anyone is really doing that to a really great level in Ireland when they come to doing proper community projects. But what we've, I guess, bringing it around, what we were really keen to do was provide a common ground, a kind of a space in which these different groups could come together. And I think that what better place to come together than a garden and a park and a space which is not necessarily a specifically one way or another way, that actually it's just about creating a really accessible and inclusive space for people to make their own. If you come in during the day, during lunchtime, in the afternoon, you'll find there's so many different residents and visitors in this park, all different ages, all backgrounds, and that's what's been so exciting for me. But the coming back to like the process of design, and trying to link that into urbanism or into, let's say, the context that we're in right now. It's very much a city. It's a fascinating site because it's so enclosed by the buildings here. It is due for regeneration. So what happened was that, like in 2006, the blocks that were here, which mirrored these ones over there, were knocked down for regeneration, and that was part of a public-private partnership program. And unfortunately, in 2008, the developer who was due to work with the city council to develop these pulled out due to the recession and due to, I guess, to the risk that he would have been under in developing these apartments. Now, I'm not an expert on public-private partnership or on regeneration in Dublin, and I've only just come back to Ireland in 2010, but it was a real it did a lot of damage to the community because they had kind of put a lot of faith into this program, and they'd gone through quite a few different phases of trying to find out what was going to happen to their houses, and they'd gone through consultation after consultation. And that was something that we were quite aware of when we went in again to say, well, we're going to create a park. It's like these false promises possibly, or these kind of unmet kind of visions that if we created too much of a vision, and then for whatever reason it got pulled, then that was going to damage even further people's belief in doing something creative or doing a large-scale project. And so it was quite a sensitive approach that we had to take to kind of working with community and then working with council and working with local businesses. And then again, for us, it was very much just to go and do it. We have to just keep moving, going, building the team. I think in some ways, I'd like to touch a little bit about public space, because a few of us, and Peter, Brian, and myself, who Peter was due to speak here today, we've been very involved in creating events and projects in public space in the city. And so that's our background over the last few years, has really strengthened that kind of belief in creating this park. But what we do is we create things like happenings, which are these outdoor cinema events in Fitzwilliam Square or around the city. I run a national day of street parties called Street Feast, which is all about redefining your public space. So 23rd of June this year, we had 20,000 people around the country eating food together. And in itself, these projects have kind of led us to, I guess, explore our relationship with our public space, and to think of new ways in which we can kind of use our public space that we have now, but also kind of comment on possibly the lack of good design for our public spaces in Ireland. And there's loads that we could talk about there in terms of in some ways it does seem that we design in a way to kind of stop people from doing things rather than to enable people to do things. If you look around the streets, you'll find that there's very little in terms of actual seating. We seem to be just through the way that we design it. It's almost like while we can't have people sitting on benches too long, they might be drinking or it might be creating antisocial behaviour, so we'll remove the benches. And in it, I just believe, and I think that some of us believe, that it's approaching design from that way is damaging the way that we are designing in our cities. And this isn't the fault of like often the city council gets blamed for it's their fault and it's their, and they haven't done this or they haven't done that. I'm not going to kind of get onto that because we don't blame the city council as such, because in some ways there's so many different reasons why that has become the case, and I think there's a great opportunity now to show that we could be doing things better. And I think that what UpStart are doing right now is we're trying to show that this isn't necessarily a sustainable model for we're all volunteers. We have to go back to our day jobs and actually do work and earn money and live. But so this isn't something that you can do, let's say, on this scale all the time. But I think that when we are trying to do innovative projects, we do need to put ourselves out there and to try and do things voluntarily, because it's too risky to do it. There isn't the money offered up to projects like these, innovative projects which might be risky. And so ideally what would happen is that the councils and people around Ireland will realise that actually this works and this is something that can be done and it's not actually that risky, and it'll move on the debate a bit further about how we create for public space. Especially with the polytunnels, it is created a covered, sheltered space which is for community. Like what you'll find is that there's so many different groups of people in there on lunchtime or when it rains. And it's something that I haven't really seen before much in Ireland, is that kind of covered, you see it in other countries, this kind of covered basketball courts in the middle of squares. And that was always, it really kind of made me think, well, why aren't we doing that in Ireland, considering we have the weather that we have? And it seems that we don't do that because of the threat of antisocial behaviour. And I think we need to be a bit more creative about how we approach that challenge, because it's such a shame that we aren't creating these kind of spaces. Like this is a kind of foyer space over here. I could even run you through a little bit of the park now before I finish up. Like this polytunnel area here was designed by A2 architects. It was designed as a kind of foyer learning space and welcome space, and it basically filters people through, getting them into the main kind of civic area of the park, which is where in front of the cafe. It was very important to us that we had that kind of large covered area where people could just do things and wouldn't have to go away when it came to the rain or when it came to Irish weather. As you walk through, you get to the cafe, and there's like an art walk as you go through. There'll be more art pieces being added. Coming towards the end, you get to this amphitheatre here. I'll tell you a little bit about the amphitheatre because I just think it's kind of interesting to kind of talk a little about the background to this project. the amphitheatre was designed by Sean Harrington Architects. Both the architects who were involved are within a couple of blocks of here, and that was important to us, but exciting because it meant that we could always meet up and look at the site. It's real, and it's less about actually like looking at models and 3D models. It's actually about coming down and going, is that going to work? So Sean Harrington was asked to come on board, and we had already got this program in place of a kind of reconciliation project, working with the Abbey Theatre and working with Northeastern Education and Library Board. So this was an opportunity to use a material which is found quite a lot in this neck of the woods. It's the pallet. We're in the markets area of Dublin. You'll find pallets on most of the corners. But it also is seen as a kind of waste material, or something which is, once it's used once, it's disposable. So, but it's also a really great material to use for something for building quickly, because it's you can forklift it in and out. It's modular. So using that material, but then looking at the north and looking at how that material is seen in a very different context up in the north. It's seen as a divisive and a, I guess in some ways the bonfires that are built out of pallets are seen as almost a symbol of sectarianism. And so to turn that on its head a bit and to work with 30 young kids, 15 of whom live in the local area, some of which used to live in the blocks of flats which were on this site, and 15 of the kids from North Belfast, loyalist areas of Belfast, which would be skilled in building with pallets. And so there was this reconciliation project which happened over the last few months of bringing those kids together, working in theatre and in spoken word, but also in exploring identity and exploring the use of these pallets as a construction material. And so for the last for 5 days they started and built this amphitheatre, and it kind of turned that symbol of sectarianism into a symbol of kind of cooperation, of unity, of working together. And coming up to 2016, that was something that we were keen to touch on, is that we seem to be continuously pushing things under the carpet when it comes to the divide, and it isn't necessarily over. There are still issues, and as we saw from this summer. So to even explore the use of construction and collaborative building methods with these kids was really rewarding for us and for everyone who involved, especially considering that the kids who used to live on this site were so involved in the process. So that gives you a bit of background about, I guess, the park and where we see ourselves fitting into Dublin. I'm not so sure if I got anything else to really talk about. I think that's probably enough for now. But I guess just to come back to the legacy part of it, we're very keen to talk to people about where this goes next. So this closes on the 22nd of September. It's that's it. And while we're in just talks with the community about what we can leave as a legacy project, maybe not on this site, but somewhere working with the local community. But also we have a lot of plans, we have a lot of materials that we're hoping to give to other community groups which would like to create something similar. But we're also creating this toolkit, so we have researchers on board who are working to make this. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts, even in this conversation now, about whether you think this is worth exploring in the future for Ireland, whether we need to be creating these kind of dynamic, creative green spaces in our otherwise dead, vacant spaces around the country. I think what it's doing is it's showing people as they walk past that what they would have seen is, in some ways, we kind of block it out. These vacant sites that we go past every day, it becomes the norm. And I hope that just by doing this, it kind of shows that actually there is a possibility for that space, no matter how small that is, or how it might be so easy to do. But why not? Why don't we try and do that? And why don't we try and remove those obstacles, which DCC have tried to do as much as possible, to remove the obstacles to creating something like this. So I urge you to go away today and just kind of consider those other vacant spaces, consider what's possible for those spaces. Look at the space around you and kind of think about what could be different about the space around you, because we're really keen to explore in our future projects about like redefining what we usually see as the norm. So hopefully that gives you a bit of background about UpStart and Grammy Park, and thanks very much.